Welcome to the conversation at airsafe.com. I'm your host, Todd Curtis. This is a special edition of the podcast featuring my visit to the Airplane Geeks, the long-running podcast run by Max Flight. This podcast, which debuted in 2008, as the name implies, is a very deep dive into many areas of aviation. They regularly discuss a wide range of topics in the commercial, military, and general aviation sectors, and they typically have at least one guest from industry. And I was that guest for episode number 392, which was published in early March 2016. We recorded the podcast on March 7, 2016, one day before the second anniversary of the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. In addition to MH370, we also discussed laser and drone threats to aircraft, an aviation maintenance competition that's coming up in April 2016, and issues around improving the quality of media reporting of aviation accidents. The Airplane Geeks podcast typically includes a news section, and during my visit, we discussed an upcoming plan by NASA to research supersonic flight, as well as an all-female flight conducted by an Indian airline in observance of International Women's Day, and the opening up of air service to Cuba. What follows is a portion of the podcast, and it's about an hour and 20 minutes long.
Let's say hello to Todd. Hi, Todd.
Good evening to you.
How are you?
Doing just fine.
It's great to have you on the show.
Well, it's great to be back on the show. I didn't realize until you invited me a few days ago that I was on back in 2008 in show number 10.
I know. I couldn't believe. I swore you were on the show. I knew you were on the show, and I'm looking for the episode, and I'm looking, and I couldn't find it, and it was just making me crazy. And then finally, I found episode 10. So for you other guys, it was Courtney and I did a sort of an attempted live show. I think we used Blog Talk Radio or something horrid like that. And we had a number of folks on, and Todd was one of the guests for that episode. So just a short little segment. But Todd, I really thought that we had you on for a real full episode someday. So I'm sorry that we haven't until now. But
well, I'm glad that day has arrived.
Absolutely. So,
didn't want to overwork you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can say hello to the guys. We have with us Rob Mark.
That's me out here in Chicago. Good evening. Good. Welcome.
Pleasure to hear from you.
And Brian Coleman's on also.
Not from Chicago. Hello, Brian.
From Los Angeles.
Brian's a West Coast guy. And we also have David Vanderhoof.
Hi. Yes,
Greetings from Philadelphia.
Oh my gosh, you're close to my neighborhood. I'm over here in Brookline, Mass, on the outskirts of Boston.
Oh, well, I'm closer. I'm just south of Hartford.
A place I've driven through many times.
I know everybody. I know. On 84. I know. I've lived here for a long time, but it was probably 20 years worth of driving through Hartford that. Never paying any attention to it, never knowing that someday I would live there. It's kind of funny how that works. But.
And Max, it looks like Max T just.
Hello.
Hey, he's there. Where are you? Are you in Washington?
I am.
Good. Well, say hello to Todd.
Hey, Todd. Dr. Todd, how are you?
Well, doing just fine.
Excellent.
All right. So why don't we get started? So Todd, I'll open up the show. We'll introduce all of the co-hosts and introduce you. And then we've got before we start with the news, we just got a little thing we want to do, a little call to action for our listeners. And then we'll jump into the news stories. And so I guess that's about it. I know you're used to doing a lot of live live things, and because we're recording and edits, that means that do-overs are allowed. So if you find the need to go back and restate something a little differently or anything like that, that's fine, no problem.
So since we're not live and not time limited, I don't have to congeal my thoughts into 7-second bursts with no more than 2 facts.
Right, exactly. It's not like being on the news.
Add to the fact that these people actually know what the hell you're talking about, so don't forget that option too.
Hey, sometimes it can be kind of dicey on live TV.
Yes, and Rob knows that too, because Rob has done a bit of that as well, haven't you, Rob?
Amen.
Yeah. Okay. If there are no questions or anything, David, why don't you take us through the checklist?
Brian, are you recording?
I am.
Robert, are you recording?
Yes, sir.
Trescott, I'm assuming you're not recording.
Correct.
All right, Max, is your primary on?
Yes.
Your secondary?
Yes.
Your speaker's turned off?
Check.
All right, hand on the buzzer.
Okay.
In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Airplane Geeks podcast. This is episode 392 of the show where we talk aviation. I'm Max Flight, and hosting with me is first Brian Coleman, our associate producer.
Good evening, Max. It's great to be here again.
All right. And also with us is Max Trescott from, I think tonight, a hotel room or something of that sort. Hi, Max.
That's true. I spent all day flying from California to Washington, D.C., and boy, are my wings tired, or arms tired, or something like that.
Glad you could make it. Also with us is our aviation historian, David Vanderhoof.
Hello, everyone. Looking forward to a good show talking about not so good things, but good show nonetheless.
And finally, co-hosting is Rob Mark, publisher of the Jetwine blog. Hey, Rob.
Good evening, everybody from Chicago.
Our guest this episode is Dr. Todd Curtis. Now, Todd's an aviation safety analyst. He's an author and a publisher. He founded airsafe.com in 1996 to provide the public with useful information on airline safety, fear of flying, plane crashes, TSA security, and other issues of concern to the traveling public. Now, while an airline safety engineer at Boeing, Todd was directly involved in many plane crash investigations, including TWA Flight 800, and he was also part of the engineering development team for the 777. In addition to writing several books on aviation safety and security, Todd's also written the book Parenting and the Internet. He's been a frequent on-air aviation expert on CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, as well as Fox News, CBC, the BBC, Discovery Channel. Todd is everywhere. NPR and many other major news media outlets around the world. Todd, welcome to the Airplane Geeks podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for making this event happen, which means now I can say I've been a multiple guest to this podcast.
That's right. For those of you who are especially sharp or very long-term listeners, Todd was on the show way back in episode 10. So it's been way too long, but we're really glad that Todd is back to join us. We'll talk about some of the things that he's been looking at airsafe.com. We're going to talk about MH370, which was lost March 8th, 2014. So we've got the second anniversary. All right. With that, let's get started with the aviation news. Is everyone ready?
Ready.
Ready from Washington.
Our first story comes from Flight Global. This is NASA selects Lockheed Martin to design supersonic X-plane. Now, under the preliminary design phase of this program, it's called the Quiet Supersonic Technology Program, or I guess QUEST. QUEST, would you say? QUESST. But under this program, Lockheed Martin will lead a team to design a half-scale supersonic X-plane, uses boom suppression technology. Now, NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden, who was our guest back in episode 316, he said, quote, "Now we're continuing that supersonic X-plane legacy with this preliminary design award for a quieter supersonic jet with an aim towards passenger flight." Well, it's, we've always sort of dreamt about supersonic flight. We experienced the Concorde for a number of years, but sort of in a limited volume, I guess you could say, again, because of this supersonic sonic boom problem. Rob, do you think we'll be flying in supersonic jets sometime in the not too distant future?
So, as David would say, I think the sonic boom issue is really a critical one. It sounds like they're much closer to it, but we still have that regulation on the books that says a civil aircraft will not exceed the speed of sound over the United States. And of course, maybe if we get close enough to dumping the sonic boom, that regulation will somehow go away. But there's still those boxes to be checked. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I just wonder if they could leverage any of the work that Boeing did with their supersonic plane from a few years back.
Ah, yes, that Boeing plane. Todd, are you familiar with that? Do you think that's some technology that may be useful?
Well, believe it or not, for a brief time during my time at Boeing, I was working on the project called the Sonic Cruiser, which was a high subsonic, not a supersonic aircraft. And it was a very short program, and there wasn't much in the way of engineering knowledge that I think was passed on. But certainly the knowledge that was built during the 60s and the first era of the SST is something that could be dusted off. But what I'm concerned about isn't the technology or even getting rid of the sonic boom. The most important thing to overcome is going to be cost. If they can get rid of the sonic boom and make it cost effective, it'll happen. But if it's going to be a situation like the Concorde, where it's a premium above even first-class tickets, and if you had limited range, well, there's not going to be an economic model that'll support it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, I think, because, yeah, as you say, the Concorde commanded such a premium price that, only a few people could afford that. What we dream of is something, of course, where everybody or most people anyway who are flying commercially can take advantage of especially fast flights. But I don't know if that'll happen or not.
But I sure would love to trade in some of my frequent flyer miles and fly on it, though.
Yeah, I don't think BA or Air France ever made any money on the Concorde. What with the 12 airplanes they had, so I think Todd's right there. I think economics is what it all comes down to, and it's hard to envision they'll be able to charge enough to make this pay off.
I can put out a radical idea that probably the first airlines to actually put them into service profitably would be more like a FedEx or UPS, in that there may be high-value packages that are more valuable than most passengers, that the customers would pay a pretty penny to get it there fast.
When I was working at a jet engine company, I would say that the most frequent question I was asked by people who knew nothing about aviation was, are you working to make jets faster? That seems to be what people kind of assumed the next frontier would be, or that is where the development and engineering was going. People always thought, well, gee, it must be making them faster. That's what everybody's working towards. And of course, you'd explain that, well, we could make them faster, but it would cost a lot of money. But also, even more than that, it would consume a lot of fuel. So I don't know what kind of efficiencies from a fuel standpoint this supersonic X-plane will demonstrate. I'll be very curious to see that.
Well, you do all know that this is an extension of a previous NASA project.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. The shaped sonic boom demonstrator, which was an F5E, had a modified nose, which is what Lockheed's using as the basis for their new X-plane. So this is 2008 technology that they're moving forward. They just didn't have any budget to create something new. The F5E was modified to have that shaped boom to keep the sound reduction lower than it was on a standard F5. But if you look at the F5E SSB and compared to what the Lockheed proposal is, or that artwork, you'll see very large similarities on how they're trying to manipulate the shape of the noise over the fuselage so you do not get that boom.
Interesting.
We were talking a few weeks ago about how NASA was getting back into the X-plane business, how they were going to start to, I think, Max, you're the one who said, re-embrace the A, the first A in NASA, not the second one. So Why do we think that is? I mean, is it generally agencies are always looking to cut projects when money is tight? I mean, do they think that space is going to get commercialized to the extent where now they need to come up with a new mission for themselves? Or what's the driving factor? Why is NASA back in the X-plane business?
Because they should have never left in the first place. I mean, there is an A in NASA for a reason. And a lot of and I don't think there's a lot of companies out there privately that are doing these kind of experiments. So I think NASA can find a way to work with the bureau or with the public organizations to come up with better experiments, but they should have never. For a while there, we were too obsessed with the S in NASA, and not enough A. So I think they're trying to find a balance, and this is one of the biggest experiments is with supersonic biz jets. So Rob Moore can go Mach 1.
Another thing about NASA that I like to stress to people when I talk about that particular organization, they have an advantage that few companies and few governments can match. That is, they have an installed infrastructure from test facilities to flight facilities, etc., that if you were a private entity, let's say an Elon Musk, you couldn't come close to the range of things that NASA has, not in any short time frame. So it makes sense that they're taking advantage of what they can do, which is dealing with the astronautics and the aerospace.
Right.
And certainly not just the facilities. I mean, they got a lot of PhDs on the payroll, a lot of really smart people
who have the advantage of being in a position where, and of course, there's some political entities who don't like this, but if you are in a government job, the likelihood of being fired if you don't make money in the next quarter is virtually zero. Now, there are some drawbacks to that, but one thing you can say, if you're in a position like that, as a civil servant, you don't have the pressure quarter after quarter, year after year of trying to make a profit. And you don't have to worry about your company coming in one day and saying, guess what, guys? After 25 years here, in 15 minutes, you're out the door. Please turn in your badge. So there's a risk-taking attitude that you can have there that you won't have in private industry.
Yeah.
I'm curious if this push on NASA's look at supersonic airplanes and things has anything to do with the Ariane supersonic business jet that's been in the plans for quite a number of years here, and of course just announced this order from FlexJet for a number of airplanes once they're built, of course. But I mean, it just seems like all of a sudden in the last 6 months, 12 months, there's been a lot of focus on supersonic again.
Yeah, that is true. That does seem true that there are a number of companies, not just Ariane, but a number of other companies making some progress in this area. Maybe it's the the lure of the value that this could provide and the profits that might result from it.
Well, there's a lot of money floating around. The economy is good. A lot of folks looking for ways to invest money. They might not always pay off, but yeah, I can imagine there are some well-heeled companies and individuals looking for new horizons, and this certainly fits the bill.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's push on. We have an item from the Hindustan Times. This is world's longest all-woman-operated flight is ready for takeoff. Now, this is something in celebration of International Women's Day, and Air India set the record for the longest all-woman-operated and supported flight. This was AI 173. They flew nonstop on March 6th from New Delhi to San Francisco. And the cabin crew, the cockpit crew, the check-in staff, the customer care staff, they were all women. So it's an interesting milestone.
Yeah, and I think part of what we're trying to do here at the Airplane Geeks is promote women in aviation and all the different aspects of it. And this certainly illustrates there's an awful lot of jobs in aviation. And I think that it's great that Air India took this opportunity to focus on having an all-woman day or at least all-woman flight there. And, got it done.
And I'm no expert on Indian culture or Indian society, but what little I know is this. The progress of all factors in society, all groups in society, hasn't had the same dynamic that you've seen in the United States. There's still issues there that have to be resolved, as there are here in the United States. But what little I do know is that the role of women is at a place that maybe the U.S. was some years ago. And although it may be seen as a stunt by folks with the U.S. perspective, one has to realize that there may be much more of a need for this sort of example in Indian society, an example that's supported by directly and indirectly by the government than there is here in the States.
Well, I don't think it's a stunt at all. I still remember very vividly the first time I was on an all-woman crewed aircraft here. I was leaving Newark, New Jersey, and it was a regional airliner. And it was kind of cool just peeking through the cockpit door and going, "Hey, there are two women up there." And the guy sitting next to me, and you kind of look at, you kind of go, "How could people be this stupid?" He turns to me and goes, "Boy, I don't think she knows what she's doing. Look, she's looking at the manual up there." I said, "No, that's because she's a really good pilot. She's looking at the manual to verify, something that she probably already knows." But anyway, I was just kind of surprised that, people could come up with, that kind of reaction. So, yep, I mean, I think this is really super accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of long-distance flying, we see an article in The Street titled Boeing 777 flies 7 of the world's 10 longest airline routes. So not to take anything away from Air India, but do you know what the longest flight in the world is? Well, it's the 8,819 miles between Dubai and Auckland, New Zealand, and Emirates started flying that on March 2nd. Now, they inaugurated the flight with an A380, but they switched to the 777-200LR the next day. But this article says that of the 10 longest flights in the world, the Boeing 777 flies 7 of them, and the Airbus A380 flies the other 3. But there's some pretty long routes in this list.
Yeah, it looked nice to see that the 787 will be making the list here shortly with a new flight, San Francisco to Singapore. So they will be on the list soon. I'm sure we'll see more of those in the future.
Yeah, boy, that's a long flight.
Isn't it really?
Wow.
That makes it the third longest flight when it comes in. Also, the longest scheduled flight by any U.S. carrier. Those are long flights. I mean, when I used to travel to Singapore on business from the East Coast, I mean, it was you had to make a couple of hops in the U.S. and then fly to Narita and then down from Narita to Singapore, and it just took forever. So direct from San Francisco to Singapore on a 787-9, I think I would really have preferred that to sitting in 747-400s for those hours.
Boring. Boring.
Why do you say that, David?
Because, let's see, when a pair of B-2s took off from Whitman Air Force Base in the middle of the country and flew 11,500 miles round trip to bomb Libya, now that's a long-distance flight.
That is a long-distance flight.
Especially since they didn't refuel. Oh, wait.
That's right.
They did.
How many times did they refuel, David?
Twice.
Okay.
Yeah, the one drawback, they had no booze on that flight either, so who would want to take it?
That was one drawback, but then there was no potty on that airplane either.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
There actually is, and a kitchen, Rob.
Oh, get out.
They have a
You mean
kitchen?
a potty they can get up and
Yes.
get out of their seat and
Yes.
get out? I didn't know that. Okay.
Boy,
Well,
that's
all
it.
right.
That's it. I'm signing up for the Air Force right now.
All right.
Hey,
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, did you notice one thing about this list of 10 longest routes? 7 of the 10 longest routes terminate in the Middle East.
Mm.
So either
They're becoming the hub of the world.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this list tells you.
It's
That
why
or-
they call it the Middle East. If we talk long before aviation, it was still the Middle East and the hub of the world.
Now, we've also got three A380s on this list of top 10 flights. I was talking with an employee of an airline this past weekend that had A380s, and this person said to me that when they first brought them on the line, they used to call them A180s because it seemed like they were turning back for most of the time with mechanical problems.
Oh, well, yeah, the A380, the Boeing 777. I remember when the Boeing 777 was being developed. Of course, I didn't know that, Todd, you were contributing to that.
Ever so slightly.
Ever so slightly. But I think one of the things I remember from that is, wasn't it one of the first airplanes that was more computer designed than predecessors had been?
Well, it was a progression. Obviously, the 767 and 757 were the first real upgrade when it came to computerized avionics and such. But of course, as with the rest of the electronics world, we're talking, 10, 15 years later, it was much more sophisticated than the 57 and 67 era. And there was a level of automation that reduced pilot workload, allowed the aircraft to do other things. One of the things that was incorporated into it was one of my favorite things, thrust asymmetry compensation. So if you lost your flight control systems, you can control the aircraft with differential engine thrust, not by manipulating the throttles, but it's incorporated into the aircraft. So by manipulating the usual rudder and control column, the engines would throttle up and back to turn the aircraft.
Ah, interesting.
A lesson learned from Sioux City.
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, there's a fantastic show that I believe it was PBS put out called 21st Century Jet. It was a 5-part series talking about the development of the 777 and, up into including first flight. A great series to watch.
All right. Speaking of routes, maybe these aren't so long, but as we discussed in a previous episode or two, the U.S. and Cuba have agreed to permit 110 daily flights between the two countries, 20 daily flights to Havana, and 10 daily flights to 9 of the other international airports in Cuba. Now, the deadline for airlines to submit applications to the Department of Transportation for proposed flight routes has expired, and 8 different airlines have put in their applications. Alaska Airlines, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, Frontier, JetBlue, Silver Airways, which is a Florida-based operator. They fly, I think, Saab 340Bs. Also Southwest Airlines and United Airlines. I think that when you add up all of the applied for flights, you exceed the 110. So I think the DOT is going to have to find some way to decide who gets what flights, and I don't know how that's going to work. But certainly a lot of interest in flying to Cuba.
Yeah, it's an awful lot of bodies being moved back and forth.
Boy, and certainly a lack of hotel rooms for all those bodies. I think that's going to be the next big catch-up factor, is getting more hotels built quickly.
Really, I wonder, I kind of wonder if the real important aspect of this isn't that the price or the value of Cuban cigars is really going to go down.
Oh, because you can bring
because everybody will be able to get them now, right?
Yeah, well, but I think there's a lot of other good reasons to visit Cuba.
Oh, absolutely.
But this issue of capacity to absorb the number of tourists has come up again in the past. People have even suggested things such as, does the cell phone capacity in Cuba, is it sufficient to handle all of these tourists with their iPhones and so forth? But I guess the DOT is going to take a look at this and make the decision on the flights sometime this summer. So I guess it means maybe late summer, fall or something, flights might begin.
Yeah, Max, in addition to that, there's also the issue over the cruise ships stressing the infrastructure as well. Certainly it's not going to stress the beds, but things like you talk about with the cell phone service and restaurants and everything else, there's just an awful lot of Americans that are going to be showing up in Cuba here soon.
Wow.
There's one thing I really fear when it comes to this new access to Cuba with aviation. The biggest danger, I think, both to the U.S. and to Cuba is some entrepreneur will make this a spring break destination.
Yeah, if I was Cuba, I think I would resist that because, I mean, there's this whole cultural angle of, Cuba has existed, as we know, in this sort of kind of isolation for a long period of time. And what's developed there is unique to Cuba. And I can just envision all these tourists coming in and kind of destroying that or at least negatively impacting the real core of the culture there.
And buying all the cars from the 50s.
I was thinking that as well, too.
Yeah.
Yep, they're going to disappear pretty fast.
No doubt. All right. Well, again, we're speaking with Dr. Todd Curtis, founder of airsafe.com. I was on the listener team we have on Slack, I think yesterday and earlier today, and explaining that, Todd, that you were going to be on the show. And the way I described it to those in that forum was Todd is the voice of reason in the sea of shoot-from-the-hip aviation accident speculators. And one of the things that I've always thought, following you for all these years, subscribing to the podcast and all, your podcast, is that one thing you tend not to do is speculate when there's accidents. And I know there's a lot of pressure for the press or to make statements and to try to explain what's happened. But you take a very kind of measured approach to that, don't you?
I do because it's the nature of how I was always trained and how I did my work back in the day, especially when I was at Boeing. And when I first started reaching out to the media, this was in the mid-1990s, the thing that drove me was I was just frustrated by seeing these folks, some of whom were supposedly well-trained and well-experienced aviation experts, who were saying things that were just not justified by the data. So I've always had a strength with analyzing the data back even before I was with Boeing. So I figured there was a wealth of information out there, a wealth of data to work with. And why not work with that as a foundation rather than speculating? Because there are people who do that much better than I ever did. And they dress better too, and they get on TV more. But again, for example, we're coming up as we do this recording, it's the day before the second anniversary of MH370. And there is a scant amount of data then and now. But even in the earliest days of that event, to give you an example, I looked at the situation, I thought, all right, with the little data we have, what theories or what general theories make sense? And I came up with 4. They haven't really changed since then. And in spite of all the wild theories that have been put out there, all the wild theories, most of them anyway, would come under one of these big 4 umbrellas. A traditional hijacking, hijacking by an insider, be it an airline employee, pilot, etc. Some massive cascading simultaneous system failure where the crew had to exercise both initiative and creativity just to keep the airplane in the air. And in the process of doing so, they weren't communicating with the outside world. And the 4th being a situation where the crew was either unwilling or unable to make any changes to the airplane's altitude, airspeed, or direction until the airplane ran out of fuel. Now, there could be a combination of things going on, but until we get some actual data from the airplane, those 4 theories of mine, which are supported by what little data there was, hasn't really changed. So that's an example of the attitude I take. Those 4, some of them might sound outrageous, but they were justified by what was out there. So my argument to people is, if you're going to be in front of the media or in front of professional groups or even in front of your friends and family, stick with the data.
Yes. Now, I understand that the search that's going on, that's being led by Australia, I guess, is scheduled to conclude this summer if they don't find anything. And would that be a terrible shame? I mean, if that were to happen, would the situation then be that we will probably never know what happened to MH370?
Well, it would be a terrible thing, and there would be pressure on the part of several parties, Chinese government, the Malaysian government, the U.S. government even, to come to some sort of conclusion with this. What really will boil down to, is there going to be enough in the way of resources put to this issue, and will they be able to keep this going? And if the collected entities who are involved in this say no, then it will stop. And if that happens, it may be decades before someone accidentally stumbles across the aircraft.
Yeah. Rob, you wrote a really good piece in Jetwine about MH370. 2 years later, has the industry changed? And yeah, you kind of conclude that in many ways a lot of things really haven't changed.
Well, I was speaking specifically to the tracking and surveillance issue, and right after MH370 disappeared, the International Civil Aviation Organization put working groups together, and they made plans, and they looked at possibilities, and all of that was really great. I mean, and so I don't want to demean the fact that they were trying, but as of 2 years later, there's really nothing in place that is any different than what we had when MH370 disappeared. So that if the same thing were to happen again, we would have just as tough a time tracking an airplane out over a place like the Indian Ocean or the South China Sea or the Pacific or wherever, because the technology, while it may be coming, like perhaps ADS-B, it's not there yet, and it's not been implemented. All we've had out of Montreal are recommendations, and of course, Todd will certainly tell you that the government works slowly, and it does. But I just thought it was interesting to look back on that and the sources I talked to and said, no, there's some great ideas out there, but right now nothing's really changed. And I don't think people know that.
And I think that with this particular issue, that is, how do you track aircraft on any point of the globe, it boils down to a lot of the reason why some things don't happen. For example, what we talked about earlier about supersonic transports. One of the big problems is going to be economic. Is there a way to make a buck and make this technology work? And one way that might happen a lot more quickly than recommendations out of Montreal might be if passengers demand that, hey, we must have our full-time internet and phone service 24/7 anywhere in the world. And if that somehow or another becomes feasible and is actually happening, then it would be a very, very simple step to make sure you're tracking the aircraft at all times, because you would have to do that if you were going to have those kinds of services. So we may have it happen a lot quicker than we think. But unless there's a move on the part of multiple governments, or unless there's a breakthrough when it comes to making money from the passengers, it's not going to happen.
No, I agree with you. And there is the cost issue and the logistical issue of, let's say, probably the emerging technology that's going to really make this happen is ADS-B. But you need receivers on the ground. And what do you do when you're out over the ocean or you're over the Amazon jungle or what have you? There's no receivers down there. And that's why we're going to probably have to wait until, the different Ariane, launches their satellites starting next year that have ADS-B receivers in them that are going to eliminate those blind spots. But that whole system won't be up and running, I think, until late 2018. But so that's still a couple of years yet. And many people that I spoke to last week thought this had already been solved. And I said, no, actually it hasn't. And they're really surprised at that. But
well, you also have our entities in Silicon Valley, such as Google and I believe Facebook, who are planning fairly innovative technologies, either high-flying solar-powered aircraft or balloons, in order to put internet service in underserved areas around the globe. Now, obviously, there's not too many people in the middle of the ocean, but certainly if that technology could be taken to maturity and taken to a level of profitability, then it may be, again, a very short step to say, hey, can't we take this proven technology and apply it strategically at various places around the globe so that you would have some semblance of worldwide coverage for things like locating aircraft or communicating with passengers.
Or for checking your Facebook status.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I read an article where Facebook was planning on launching a satellite and having it start off be specifically for Facebook-only traffic, but their plan was to, after they proved out the technology, to open it up to other data.
we were talking about MH370 and not having information, not having data, let's say, that helps us understand that. There's another accident recently. I'm thinking of the A321 that was flying out of Mogadishu, Somalia, I think, that experienced that explosion as a result of someone bringing a bomb on board, I guess. Todd, you've taken a look at this. I know you track this stuff pretty well. It seems like because of the situation there in Somalia, we may not learn much about the root cause of this accident.
Well,
or at least not quickly.
It was a very complicated situation, not from the explosion and technical part of it, but from the organizational part of it. You have the Somali government, which only, I believe, less than a year before, had actually regained control of some of its national airspace. And obviously they would be in charge of the investigation. But infrastructure-wise, they don't have anything like an AAIB or an NTSB that level of capability. Of course, they can bring in folks from the outside. But more to the point, you have an airline that was flying out of Somalia, but I believe it was owned by a Somalian, but headquartered in Dubai or in another country, and it was its hub was over in Djibouti. And again, when you have this multiple layered responsibility of who's flying this plane and who, I neglected to add this. A few days later, turned out that it was a Turkish airline flight that was supposed to take this route. For whatever reason, that airline had canceled, and this plane was supposedly taking the place of the Turkish airliner. So I said to myself, now wait a minute. In addition to all the other entities I just mentioned, would Turkish Airlines should they be involved in this? That is, who is going to be responsible for answering questions such as, did Turkish Airlines know anything? And if so, when did they know it? Did the Somali government have an actual level of competence or capability, not competence, but capability, to do the oversight of situations like this? And I'm not even going to talk about airport security, where there had been some videos released some days after the event that seemingly showed two people who were on the ground handing a package a laptop to the person who was allegedly the bomber. And this is all very fine and good that the bits and pieces of information have been released. And the average person might think, well, the various people who are responsible are actually on the case and looking at this. But I don't see the kind of coordinated action that you would see happening if there was a real, honest, and serious effort to look at this not as an individual bomb on one airplane, but as a possible system-wide problem in that region of the world when it comes to the safety of airlines. So again, the actual explosion itself, very simple. The details and the organizations and the relationships around the explosion, very hard for me to figure out.
And tell me if this is true, there's no real mechanism that would force this to a proper conclusion.
Well, they're the only mechanisms that exist, and of course it's a voluntary agreement amongst international entities, is going to be Annex 13 under, I believe it's the Chicago Convention, which talks about how do you conduct an investigation if it's an accident. There are certain roles that people play. There are parties who are directly involved in the investigation. The investigation should be open and shared with the world and such. But if it's not an accident, if it's a deliberate act, an act of terror, a military event, there are no established international norms for how it should be conducted or whether any information would be released about it. And let's go back in time, and I'll do two very, very different comparisons. Way back in, I believe it was 1988, please correct me if I'm wrong, was Lockerbie, where you had the bomb blowing up in the Pan Am 747 over Scotland. The AAIB had a fantastic analysis of what happened, very detailed descriptions of what happened, the sequence of events, how the bomb affected the aircraft structure. They publish this for the entire world. If you go to the United States, if you have an event where it's a deliberate action, be it 9/11 or the Pacific Southwest aircraft back in, I believe it was 1970s, early 1980s, where an ex-employee came in with a .44 Magnum and shot both pilots. You didn't see anything like a formal, open analysis that was released to the public for them to mull over. If it's a deliberate action, if it's an act of terror, there's not going to be an NTSB-like report released to the public. Now, they're both deliberate actions, both what happened in Lockerbie and what happened in the U.S., but Britain has had a much different response than U.S. authorities. So again, your earlier point, no, there is no international agreement on how to deal with something that is not an accident, but which may lead to the loss of lives and the loss of aircraft.
One of the threats, actually two of the threats that we see in the press all the time these days are threats from people shining lasers at airplanes in flight and people flying drones, small drones, up near airplanes. Todd, maybe you can talk about those both from the standpoint of really how dangerous are these things, and is there a path to a solution?
First, a bit of full disclosure. No, I didn't give you a heads up about this beforehand, or I didn't pay anyone off. But it so happens that a few months ago, I did a fairly extensive analysis of the drone data provided by the FAA, and I put it out on the site at lasers.airsafe.com, where I basically took the spreadsheets that they had out there and tried to make sense out of it. And looking at the 2010 to 2014 timeframe in the United States, the number of reports that came in every day was averaging roughly 10 per day during that 5-year span. And preliminary reports from 2015 show that it's roughly twice that, 20 a day. And what's worse, I know of at least 2 occasions where there were laser strikes that were reported but didn't end up in the FAA database. One of them was an event where a gentleman went to prison. He apparently shined a light at like a police helicopter and a Southwest Airlines 737. I thought, the FBI has this case. They put the guy in jail. Both of those reports should be in the database. I should see something about the helicopter and something about the airliner. I saw the report, I believe, about the helicopter, but not the airliner. I thought, well, gee, there's a disconnect there. As a very basic requirement, if someone goes to prison, and if the federal government put them in prison, they should make sure it ends up in the FAA database. Didn't happen. Another event, I actually saw a laser being shot at an aircraft when I was flying into Boston about 2 years ago. And I went to the FAA website, went through the process, submitted the report. Of course, I wasn't a flight crew member, I was a passenger, but they said, hey, if you see it, report it. I did my civic duty, and when I did my research a few months ago, I couldn't find any evidence of my report being there. So when I say there were roughly 10 per day during that 5-year period, in my opinion, it's probably a lot higher than 10. It's just that only some of them end up in the database where they should be. On the drone issue, that's something where it has gone exponential beyond what anyone could have guessed 2 or 3 years ago. And that's due in part to the concurrent improvements that have happened in communications and in computer power. You now have, in something weighing a few grams, enough power in the chips that are out there to communicate with the drone, to put in a flight plan, etc. You don't have to have basic piloting skills to launch a drone that can go on a pre-planned course if you wanted to. And also, unlike regular airplanes, it's relatively easy to cobble one together without going through a manufacturer. So the FAA's requirement that drones over, I believe, a half pound have to have a registration number. By the way, I did do that myself. I signed up for this when it was free. I don't have a drone, but I figure, let me get in while the getting's good. For the first month, the FAA said, we'll waive the $5 charge.
Right. So
I actually have a number I'll slap on any drone I get in the future. But backing up a little bit, I can go out right now and find bits and pieces of drones, put it together without going through a manufacturer, and fly it to my heart's content. So if the intent was to make sure every drone that's manufactured has a responsible party associated with it, the FAA succeeded. If the goal was to have every drone tracked to an owner, the FAA has not succeeded. And the technology in the next few years will probably be much more capable than the technology of today. So between 3D printing, more sophisticated electronics, the drone problem will probably get either a whole lot worse, or maybe the fad will go the other way. It'll get a whole lot better if people stop getting excited about flying drones.
And let's just scale it briefly. I had a conversation with someone at the FAA today who said this past weekend alone, pilots reported 18 drone sightings where they felt there was a possible conflict. So you look at that and go, wow, that's a huge, huge number.
Yeah, it's a tough problem, and in part, you can say that in many cases this may be actions from people who just have no concept of what they're doing or the danger that they may be bringing to aviation. Just lack of awareness, but it's tough when you have hundreds of thousands of these things being sold and no training, no awareness, and it could just lead to a serious situation at some point in time. Almost just statistically, it seems likely that something bad is going to happen at some point.
Yeah, it has to. I mean, there was somebody posted a video in Europe a day or two ago. He flew his DJI quadcopter to 11,000 feet. I mean, if you have 100,000 drone owners, there's at least a few crazy people in that bunch.
And drones and lasers share another common reality in that both are technologies that were developed for other reasons, and they happen to be to a certain level regulated. For example, if you have a consumer product of any sort, you have to follow consumer regulations. Just like if you buy a radio, it has to follow FCC requirements for how the radio performs. But there isn't necessarily a coordination between those entities which deal with consumer products and those entities that deal with aviation. The FAA might have said if they were at the table years ago, it's like, you know what? Lasers are great things for industrial uses and such. But maybe there should be some thought put into putting real restrictions on handheld lasers that you can just whip out of your pocket and use as a laser pointer in a PowerPoint presentation, and that it may be great for a PowerPoint presentation, but even something that's a giveaway at conferences, I've had that kind of swag a few times, can cause problems to aircraft. There hasn't been a conversation before like that, and to a certain extent, the cat's out of the bag because you have laser manufacturers who are not in the U.S., where just like a lot of other consumer products, they're not manufactured here, but they're shipped here. Even if tomorrow the FAA had an ability to stop all imports, all sales of laser pointers, it does nothing about the pointers that are here. It will do very little about other countries where these pointers could show up. You can solve the problem here, but it's inherently an international problem and has to have an international solution, both drones and lasers.
For lasers, there's no technology solution to this. Is there some kind of coating on airplane windscreens that would reflect lasers? There's no option like that you're aware of, is there?
I've heard of options like that. I have not looked at specifically the technology to see if the kind of coatings you can put on a windscreen can keep it from dazzling the pilots, or if there's some anti-laser shades that might be a derivative of what the military uses that you could use. But we're talking about, again, getting back to the kind of laser issues you can have. Most of the laser problems are not from something that will actually do damage to the airplane. James Bond aside, the likelihood of any laser shooting a hole in an airplane at a great distance is virtually nil.
Yeah.
And whether or not a laser will actually cause a problem for the pilot will depend on how it hits the aircraft. Does it cause a bright flash on the whole windscreen and you're sort of flash blinded? Does it happen right before landing or right after takeoff where it might be a critical phase of flight? Is it happening with airline pilots only where the likelihood of getting both pilots taken out is probably low? Whereas if it happens on a general aviation aircraft with a single pilot operation, the likelihood of it leading to really serious problems is much, much higher. Again, there are a variety of issues here that have to be addressed. And I will say this, from the data, the problem is all over the place. Small airports, large airports, police helicopters, you name it.
I was going to say, too, that the possibility of people thinking this through with on the drone side, at least, it makes sense logically, but that's not how the FAA works. They're there to check boxes and look like they're accomplishing their mission. I mean, when we look back at Christmas of last year, when everyone thought that 1 million or 1.5 million drones were going to appear on the horizon, they issued instructions to airports that said and to drone purchasers that if you were going to fly within 5 miles of an airport, you needed to notify the airport and air traffic control. And so just before Christmas, because we work with a couple of airports, I asked these managers, I said, well, what's the plan when people start calling about drones? And they said, well, we don't know. And I talked to air traffic in some of them around Chicagoland too. What's the plan when people call and say they want to fly a drone within 5 miles of your airport? I don't know. I mean, and that was not a fluke. I mean, that concept was pervasive over a lot of airports I spoke to, because the FAA just said you must contact the airport and you must contact air traffic, but they didn't tell either of those people what to do, and no one has any clue how that was going to prevent anything. So again, it's another one of those situations where nobody really thought that through.
Things are moving just so fast.
Well, sure. Oh, and
Yeah.
it's like that with
Not an
lasers.
excuse,
I'm
but-
sure. You know, they're selling so many of them that the manufacturers are just saying, "Hey, get out of the way so we can sell this stuff because people want them," and the regulation takes or the safety aspect of it is secondary.
Well, we've talked about automating cockpits and not having any pilots. I mean, that would solve certainly the laser problem. It's not going to solve the drone problem.
No. All right. Well, Todd, we wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about this aviation maintenance competition that's coming up. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, absolutely. This is a competition that involves maintenance professionals who are either in the field working for airlines, equipment manufacturers, students in aviation schools, to come together to have a straight-up competition where they're trying to prove their skills against their fellow maintainers. And it's the organization is the Aerospace Maintenance Competition Organization. It was created by former NTSB board member John Golia, who, as many of you know, has been a very long time, like 50-year history in aviation as a maintenance person. And his idea was to raise the profile of the maintenance profession and give a platform where, especially the younger folks coming into the industry, can see that, yes, this is a job with a future. This is an opportunity to see what their future might be like 5-10 years down the line working with an airline or whomever. And also to get a chance to meet other people in their profession. And the next one is going to happen at the MRO Americas in Dallas in early April. And right now, last I checked with John, there's about 50-plus teams coming to compete. This is the third time we've done it. We did it before last year in Miami, the year before that in Vegas. And it's a great competition. Full disclosure, I don't have a maintenance background whatsoever, and I'm learning stuff all the time about the industry and the challenges of the industry. And as many of you know, one of the challenges is how does one become a fully qualified FAA-certified maintenance professional? It's not an easy road, and it's not something for everyone. It takes dedication and hard work. But unlike a lot of professions out there, you can go get your formal training and be relatively sure that you'll have an opportunity to be employed in several different places around the country.
You know, we've talked about some of the forecasts for the number of pilots that will be required in the next 20 years, and that tends to get most of the attention. But along with those forecasts for pilots is the need for aviation maintenance technicians as well. I mean, there's a huge demand for that, isn't there?
Well, absolutely. In fact, the demand is probably going to be more of an issue for the aviation industry, because if you have the kind of background that can allow you to become a certified FAA maintenance person, you also have the skills that are in high demand in other industries. So one of the issues that John especially pointed out to me was that there's competition for these folks' services outside of aviation, and sometimes where the pay scale is better than what they can get starting off. So it's even more imperative that there be more activities like this that raise the profile of this, raises the interest level, and gets people interested in entering the schools at their local technical college or junior college, or in their an industry program if they're with a company that will provide that training for them.
Now, you passed along to us a link to an article in the ADA Journal. It's called "The Super Bowl of Aviation Mechanics Skills Creates an Audience of Future Safety Professionals." What's the safety professionals angle here?
Well, of course, my background as well as John's are in safety as well as in the other parts of the aviation business that we were in. One of the things we emphasize is that the need for mechanics of all kinds and people in that profession isn't just to fix airplanes, but to maintain the safety of the system. And that their contribution, although they might think that they're a low level in the industry, is vitally important because, as you all know, being aviation professionals, it takes a network of people, a team of people, hundreds of thousands around the world, in fact, most of whom won't know each other personally, but they must understand the importance of what they're doing and why they're doing it. So, again, a maintenance professional, in my opinion, by default, is intimately involved with the safety system as well.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. All right. Well, we're kind of running out of time here, but let's circle back maybe to where we started talking about the media and reporting in the media of aviation incidents and accidents and so forth. And we had a great question from Micah that he posted in the listener team there on Slack. And he asked if you could talk a little bit about the news media reporting of aviation-related stories in general and how that might be able to be improved. So, Todd, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as you can probably imagine, I have a couple of thoughts on that. I started getting involved directly with the media as a part of my process for starting airsafe.com back in 95 when I first started with the idea, in 96 when it launched. And my idea then was to use the skills I had, which were very limited. But one skill I did have is I looked at this as a marketing challenge in a sense. How does one market aviation safety in the sense of making an audience aware of it, aware of what it can do for them to understand it, and to lead them into places where they can essentially make better decisions and take actions based on what they know about safety. So in addition to putting together the site, I started saying to myself, well, gee, how can I reach out to the media so I can get in newspapers, get on radio shows, etc.? I looked at this like a baseball analogy. If I wanted to be in the big leagues, I have to start taking lessons of how to swing the bat and catch the ball, and then work on getting into a single-A team somewhere. So I said to myself, doesn't matter how small the entity, if it's a news organization, if it's someone publishing a newspaper, radio station, etc., I'll reach out to them and say, look, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing, here's a resource that answers your questions. If you need me, call me. And because my interaction with the media, however small the entity was, I got better at providing information that was actually useful to the audience. And one of the principles I had is I never underestimated my audience. I always assume that whoever I'm talking to is very intelligent about the decisions they make for themselves. So every passenger, every person working on the ramp, anyone involved in aviation, if they're making a decision about it or if they have a concern about safety, whatever their concern is, whatever their problem is, they know their situation best. So it didn't help me, and it wouldn't help them to talk down to them or say, well, I've got this degree. No. What are the issues that are problems? How can I address those problems and allow them to solve them for themselves? And one of the big problems I saw was bad information. So in addition to putting together the website, I was driven to how can I better prepare myself so that they call me versus that clown over there I don't like when they need a blurb, when they need a comment, when they need someone to go on camera. So as far as how has the media changed, the biggest change over the last 20 years is back then, media was still dominated by the usual suspects, the television stations, newspaper publishers, magazines, radio, etc. If you wanted to get to an audience, you had to work through an existing network of information providers. Slowly, that's changed where you still have the usual suspects. They might have changed their names, and some companies might have gotten bigger, some smaller. But you have a much greater reach now. Any individual can take absolutely free resources and have the ability to communicate with the entire world. Your average smartphone, it's got Skype, so you can do radio and TV interviews. Better yet, you can talk directly with someone who might be a kindred spirit on the other side of the world, and it doesn't cost a penny. If you think, well, gee, I got an idea, I want to publish it out there. Okay, maybe only 2 or 3 people will read it, but you have not only websites and blogs, you've got Twitter, you got Facebook, you got LinkedIn, you've got Periscope, which I actually tried for the first time the other day. I don't know if anyone has done Periscope. Basically, you can do live TV broadcasts from your phone. And 90% of the people I've seen don't have anything worth saying. You should make a point of being one of the 10%. Use this technology to the greatest extent possible. So I'm all over the map here, but my basic point is, A, the media is no longer them, it's everybody. B, whatever tools you have, however, even if you think you have only a little bit of skill and a little bit of talent, use it. Practice it. You'll get better.
One of the aspects of all this, of course, is the rush to be first, right? Because of all the instant communications. And sometimes it seems that all the facts aren't assembled properly in that rush to be first or rush to be fast. I think you probably agree.
Oh, I totally agree on that. And one of the things I started doing even years ago is I said to myself, I can't be CNN. I can't be out there. Yes, I'm the first one to say this. Because no, I'm not there. I don't have the best information. So for example, when I become aware of something happening, I don't rush to get something out there. What I do rush to do is get some sort of context for what happened out there. Case in point, almost a couple of years ago, it was July 17, 2014, which happened to be the 18th anniversary of Flight 800. And I was working that morning to put together a little something for the website to sort of like talking about, yes, this is the 18th anniversary of Flight 800. And suddenly I get an email or tweet saying, a phone call from a media person saying, hey, Todd, plane that's 777 from Malaysia Airlines just crashed somewhere in Ukraine. I'm thinking, okay, somebody's trying to troll the media. Someone is thinking the media is paying attention to airplane issues because it's the 18th anniversary, so we'll just put a joke story out there and see how far it'll run. So I actually sat back and said, I'm going to wait a half hour. I'm not going to jump on this yet because I think this is completely bogus. Turns out it wasn't. But waiting to get some background information, waiting to get confirmation, waiting to get additional information is something I do for all events, in that there's plenty of media out there. There are plenty of people tweeting about it, writing blogs about it, doing videos, major networks, etc. Take the time to use your specific skills and expertise, whatever that may be, to give some unique insight or angle to it before you blurt out to the world.
Yeah, good advice. Very good advice, Todd. I think you hit it on the head. Well, why don't we close up this segment and give you an opportunity to just briefly tell our listeners what kinds of resources they can find on airsafe.com. I know many of them are familiar with the work that you do, but for those others, what do they find there?
Well, there's a variety of resources, some of which have to do with aviation. For example, I keep a list of what I think are high-profile aviation events that happen every year. Airline crashes for sure, but other events which may be of great interest to the aviation community and which I think have an impact on the public's perception of aviation safety. In addition, I have a lot of resources for average air travelers. For example, there's a complaint section where I give a how-to tutorial on how to complain to an airline. That is, what are the basic things you should do in order to make it more likely that whatever complaint you have actually gets addressed. And to avoid those complaints, I also have all sorts of issues about common issues that usually lead to complaints. Baggage. Believe it or not, the baggage pages are by far the most popular pages on the site. What are the basic baggage rules? What are the rules for carry-ons? How should you carry large amounts of cash, which surprisingly is a very, very popular page. And what you shouldn't do when it comes to valuable documentation, cash, jewelry, etc. I even put in a section after the changes in Colorado and Washington State on how to fly with marijuana. Here's a heads up. Basically, it says no, 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 you can't do it. But I wrote it in a way that filled an information gap. That's another thing I didn't cover earlier, filling information gaps. Obviously, the marijuana industry was touting, oh, come to Colorado and Washington, we have marijuana. The government was saying, it's illegal on a federal level, don't do it. But there was nothing in there that says to the average passenger, if you're going to do this, how can you do so and actually not do something stupid and actually be within the law? Basic things like, well, gee, you can't use a credit card to buy this stuff because of the federal limitation. So if you're a traveler coming from overseas, here's a heads up about the American system when it comes to marijuana. Use cash, go to the ATM first. Again, I talk about that. I talk about baggage issues. I talk about traveling with children. I give advice on doing that. And again, rather than going through the dozen or so things that are there, including some heads up about medical issues in flying, go to the website, search on the search engine on the website, and you'll very likely find many of your common questions addressed within that site. In addition, we have a YouTube channel, a podcast, as well as a Twitter account. Twitter name is AirSafe. So if you want to keep track of what we're doing at AirSafe, you can do it that way.
All right. Excellent work, Todd. As I've mentioned, you've been doing this for quite a while.
20 years as of July.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Believe it or not.
I haven't been following you that long, but almost. What was the year that you first started AirSafe? 96?
96. July 3rd, which was, I did it deliberately. It was the 8th anniversary of the shoot down of the Iran Air A300. And by coincidence, 2 weeks to the day after I launched it, Flight 800 happened.
Wow. All right, Dr. Todd Curtis, airsafe.com. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay. That was good, Todd.
Well, like I said, it's a longer form, so I didn't cut it down to 8-second chunks.
Yeah. I imagine you might have enjoyed it a little bit for that reason.
Well, I was getting on my horse for a little bit there.
That's okay. That's not a problem.
Hey, Todd, I actually had a question for you. And you talked at the beginning about speculation. And I want to know, because I just read an article today about Martin Dolan, who's the head of the Australian Authority for MH370. And he says that they're going to find stuff by July. I just want to know, how can he know that they're going to find something by July? It seems like a pretty big speculation to me.
Well, let me just speculate on speculation. He's speaking to an audience that wants to have some semblance of hope that there'll be some progress. And what they may find, I'm not sure what he's referring to, but it may be, and I'm going out on a limb here, that the absence of evidence in itself might be something worth reporting, in that you have, among other things, a patch of ocean which has never been thoroughly explored before. And the Australians, hats off to them, are doing a fantastic job of doing a very detailed seafloor survey of what's down there. Unlike the North Atlantic, which during the Cold War and before that, when there were transatlantic lines being laid, there have been for over 100 years a great interest in the seafloor between North America and Western Europe. That part of the Indian Ocean, there was never that kind of research, there was never that kind of military activity, there was never that kind of reason to poke around down there. They've had a reason now, and they've done a remarkable job. So, again, they will find, if nothing else, a very, very detailed map of the seafloor and a very, very extensive look for the wreckage in that area. So by then, they will definitely have that information. Beyond that, I'm not sure what he was referring to.
Interesting. Boy, I hope they find something. All right. Folks are always asking us how they can dip into the back catalog of Airplane Geeks episodes. Brian, you want to tell people about some options for doing that?
Yeah, so there are two ways to get a hold of the back episodes, including episode 10 that feature Dr. Todd. The first way would be to send me an email, and that would be at brian@airplanegeeks.com. The second, even easier way is to go to a website one of our listeners, William in the Netherlands, created this website, and he's donated the bandwidth and programming and all, and by year has compressed all the shows into a single download file.
Yeah, that website is airplanegeeks.oosz.org. And again, yes, as Brian says, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. He sort of chunked it up to some big annual files, and so you can download it by year. So thanks to Willem for putting that together.
Well, there's another way that I actually found myself. My old standby of, I'll just put it in Google. I did like Airplane Geeks episode 10, and up came a page that had episode 10. I clicked on it and played in Windows at airplanegeeks.com/etc 2008/08/11. So basically, search on Google.
That's always a good way to do that.
So do you think maybe 100 years from now, people will be going back and saying, wow, and this is what it was like in the early days of podcasting? You know, like the old movies, we're trying to restore this to the original form of this podcast so you could hear what it was like when it first aired 100 years ago.
It's hard to say.
Either
that's
that
going
or
to be
it will be determined that it was some form of obnoxious oral torture for people.
That's right. It'll be banned. It'll no longer be legal to listen to.
No.
Hey, but for the completest of the completest of the group, will be able to go back and listen to all 10,000 episodes. Though, how much fun would that be?
Oh my God!
I think the biggest observation from the future will look back and say, of all the internet technologies, audio podcasting was perhaps the only one that was not overrun with pornography.
Yeah.
But we're going to change that.
Oh no, not this episode.
Or overrun with
We're just not
trolls.
sure how yet.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the listener mail we received. My favorite comes from Isaac. He posted this actually on the listener team, the Airplane Geeks listener team. This is from Liam News. It's on engine architectures. And there was a conference recently, the Pacific Northwest Aerospace Alliance 2016 Sub-Supplier Conference in Seattle. And at this event, Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce, GE, they all talked about their latest engine projects, the technology being employed, the strategies that they're using. And I thought it was just a fascinating article because, you know, we talk about or you read about what's Pratt doing with the GTF, what's GE doing with ceramic matrix composites and higher core temperatures and pressures. And this puts all of that together in one article that marches through the three big OEMs there and what they're doing. And I thought it's just fascinating to look at the different technological approaches, the different strategies that are being employed. Also, how engineering challenges kind of cascade. Todd, I'm sure you're really, really familiar with this, but I love the description of how in the GE engine, how if you want to raise pressures in one section, how that means you have to do something else with a different component, and some other section then is impacted by that, and so you have to redesign or re-engineer something else. I kind of characterize it, as I said, as sort of cascading engineering challenges. So I think it's just a fascinating article. We'll put a link to this one in the show notes.
That's one of the subtleties of engineering that I appreciated, especially when I was at Boeing, and the fact that you have many integrated codependent systems, whether it's an airplane level or an engine level. And you just can't casually say, well, gee, if we do this, it'll make things better. No, it'll make things different.
Yes, exactly. We also heard from Mark Harvey, and he says that he was listening to our episode 389 with Sarah Rickman. This was the episode where we talked about the WASP. And he said, listening to the exploits of the ferry pilots and WASP, it reminded me of the British equivalent in the war, the ATA, or Air Transport Auxiliary. And he found a documentary video on YouTube. It's called Spitfire Women. And it tells the history and gives a lot of information about the ATA. He says there were far less total pilots in the ATA But in both organizations, meaning the ATA and the WASP, the volume of aircraft delivered to the front line is staggering and was vital to the war effort. He says, I just find it amazing that these pilots were flying aircraft with no experience on type, just based on the pilot's notes that they were given, and flying so many different types, even in one day. So thanks to Mark. I think we'll also put this YouTube video in the show notes. Have a look at that. That's at airplanegeeks.com/392 for episode 392. And then we heard from a different Mark. He said, I'm still in awe of your great podcast. Thank you, Mark. Massive thank you to all of you for the hard work and time it takes. He says, I thought you may like this. I never knew this helicopter existed. Such a wacky idea. I suppose that's what we do here. Would you want to fly in a helicopter with jets on the tips of the rotors? So this is an item from the BBC titled, Why Did the Half Plane, Half Helicopter Not Work? And this is about the Ferry Rotodyne that was developed in the 50s and 60s. And this is kind of an odd craft. It's fairly large. It takes off vertically using the helicopter rotors, but they're driven by jets, little jets on the tips. But then it also has sort of wings, kind of stubby wings, that has turboprops on them for forward flight. Interesting craft. David, are you familiar with the Ferry Rotodyne?
Of course I am.
I know. I almost didn't have to ask, did I?
No, I was sort of surprised that people are discovering one of Great Britain's possible successes, but inevitably failures. But the only reason why I know about it was because there was a model made of it. Airfix made a model of it, but it was a compound helicopter. It was designed for. The hope was to be able to go from downtown London out to airports or from London to Paris. And it was the 60s. They tried a lot of things. Everybody was trying new things, and helicopter technology was very immature. And
well, I just looked at Wikipedia and saw a picture of this, and I'm not sure if I can better imagine Austin Powers or Hugh Hefner flying that back in the 60s.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I was going to say, it has a very 60s kind of feel to it,
yeah, it does.
And clamshell doors in the back, for cargo. I mean, it's an interesting aircraft. Everybody should go look at it, and maybe someday I'll do a history segment on it after the long list that's ahead of it. So
it sounds like an opportunity for yet another NASA X-plane. They could figure out how to get it right. Combine this with the supersonic aircraft they're working on.
Well, we sort of have got it right. You wanted the speed of a helicopter. You wanted the vertical takeoff and landing of a helicopter and the speed of a turboprop.
The Osprey V-22.
That would be the Osprey. And compound helicopters are coming back. The Sikorsky Raider is a compound helicopter with a pusher propeller. So the technology hasn't disappeared. It's just being executed slightly different.
Okay, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Airplane Geeks podcast. We want to thank you all for listening. We want to thank especially our guest, Dr. Todd Curtis, founder of airsafe.com. Todd, again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It was indeed a pleasure.
And we'll have to have you back more frequently than once every 8 years.
I agree with that.
Okay.
And he made it. He's one of those guests that made it all the way to the end. It's kind of frightening.
You're a real trooper. All right. Let's tell everyone where they can find us online, or if you have any other little information you want to pass along, this is your opportunity. We'll start with you, Brian. How can folks reach you?
The best place to get a hold of me is brian@airplanegeeks.com.
And Max Trescott.
Oh, I would say go out to Twitter. You'll see what I did this past weekend. I live tweeted again from the San Francisco area all the way down south of San Luis Obispo. And you'll get to see all kinds of beautiful pictures of the coast of California. So go to twitter.com/Max Trescott, TRESCOTT, and follow me.
Great. And David Vanderhoof, how do folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter at DM Vanderhoof, staring at in jealousy at all of Max Trescott's flight photographs. Or you can find me on the UAV Digest with Max Flight on Friday mornings.
And Rob Mark.
All things jet wine. JETWHINE.
All right, I'm Max Flight. You can find me on Twitter at Max Flight. Also look for me on LinkedIn. And as David mentioned, at the UAVdigest.com. I'm also on the PaxX podcast with passenger experience expert Mary Kirby. Find us at airplanegeeks.com. You can find all the links to us on social media there, Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. If you'd like to learn more about the listener team, just visit airplanegeeks.com/team. We'd love to see you over there. Show notes for this episode are at airplanegeeks.com/392. So we ask all of you to please join us again next week as we talk aviation on the Airplane Geeks podcast. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the special edition of The Conversation at airsafe.com. If you'd like to find out more about the Airplane Geeks podcast, please visit them at airplanegeeks.com. Max Flight, who produces Airplane Geeks, also produces the podcast The UAV Digest, and you can find out more about that at the UAVdigest.com. You can subscribe to either one of Max's podcasts using iTunes or your favorite podcast directory. As always, if you want to find out more about aviation safety and security, please visit airsafe.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.